Hello and welcome to Book Circle Presents Kiss the Frog. This is a story about Gus and Doug, two young men from Chicago who traveled far, got twisted up in some very bad magic, but are now back in Chicago. Only they're no longer human. They're trying to fix that, and their hunt for a cure has led them to the basement of the Natural History Museum in Chicago. They moved around quietly, despite being big and booted. The place was a maze of granite block walls containing a finer maze of shelving loaded with crates and boxes, sometimes clearly labeled, sometimes not. They didn't really pay attention to the boxes, feeling instead for magic. "Ha," said Doug softly, just as Gus went, on registering a whiff of magic. Doug pointed ahead to a door with light leaking out from under it. Silently, they drifted by the door and felt the magic rise and fall. Then they drifted back and paused, considering. They were learning to feel not only the presence of magic, but its quality. Glamour, such as they were wearing and such as hid the door, was delicate and steady, heady. The magic here was complex. Nothing roared or stank or glared at them. Rather, there was a quiet bubbling of many different little magics. And there was a little white card tacked to the door, readable to their eyes. Hengist. Doug grinned and met Gus's eyes, held up his new phone, and nodded at the receding hallway. When they were several yards away, he said softly, "Let's check that name. Call in the cavalry." "Cool, yeah." Doug dialed. A male voice answered in a British accent. "Doug, 2 times in as many days. What's up?" In the background was a sound of multitudinous drumming. Fletcher was out in company with several horses, or it sounded like that. "Hi, Captain Phil. We're following a lead on our shape issue. We're in the basement of a museum in Chicago and have found someone named Hengist doing magic. Can you tell us anything about him or how to find out?" "Ah, hold on." There were a few seconds of uninterrupted hoofbeats, then, "I'm texting you the number for the Vanguard Civilian Contact Office. Tell them I referred you and give them your full names. They'll have you on file. Gus with you?" "Yes, sir." "More power to you both." A few minutes later, they were ready. Gus stood straight and asked, "Do I look human?" "As much as you can. Wait, your tail's showing." "Probably that slide down the stairs." Glamour is fragile unless reinforced. He took off his scarf and put it on again, resetting the illusion. They returned to the door and this time let their footsteps ring. Doug nudged Gus with an elbow. Gus rapped the door and said, "Mr. Hengist?" There was silence, in which even a feeble imagination could hear amazement and alarm. Then a man's voice answered sharply, "Who is it?" "I'm Gus Weiskopf, and I'm here with my friend Doug Chung. We'd like to ask you for some advice." "How did you find me?" Doug answered, "We're sundered and looking for magical help. We ran across the glamored door upstairs and followed up. We hear you're a Kurdian, and so might know something that could help us." "Help you with what? And what do you know about the Kurdians?" "We know that the Kurdians are a very old international organization of scholars," Doug replied. "You study sundered stuff from the sundered side." "And to the help we need," Gus put in. "That's an interesting story." Doug gave him a thumbs up. Bait. "We only want advice," Doug said. "We understand we're a surprise and we'll just go away if you want." "But you'll miss that interesting story," Gus teased. They heard a faint snort of laughter. Hengist knew he was being baited. "You come in peace." "What, are you on the moon?" Gus asked. "Yeah, we come in peace. We're not dangerous. Well, we are, but not to you. We promise." "We promise," Doug repeated, just to be explicit. There was silence for a few seconds. Hengist must be contemplating the offer of an interesting story, the promise of peace, and the fact that he was, after all, cornered in his office. Being a Curdian, he must have stupid amounts of both curiosity and courage. What are your full names? Oh, you want to play those games, Doug answered, letting a bit of impatience creep into his voice. Neither of us has a name, Geas, but here goes. I, Douglas Sheng-Ming Chiang, promise I come in peace and mean you no harm. And I, August Virgil Weisskopf, promise I come in peace and mean no harm. After a few seconds of silence passed, in which they could feel the curdle of little magics shift around some, all right, come in. Gus opened the door, but coming in was another matter. The office had clearly started out as a closet. Shelves intended for cleaning products now held books, loose manuscripts, and bits of pottery and metal that, on a quick glance, looked like they should go up into the Egyptian exhibit, or had come from there. For a desk, Mr. Hengist had room only for the kind of classroom chair that has an arm that doubles as a writing surface. This was occupied by a large laptop. One normal person might have stood before that desk. There was no room for Gus or Doug. Mr. Hengist himself was wiry, middle-aged, gray-haired, and clean-shaven, and wore a tweedy jacket. He gazed at his visitors in renewed consternation. Oh, maybe we should take this conversation up to the cafeteria, Gus proposed. Hengist didn't answer. He was giving them both penetrating stares. Doug caught the tiniest flicker of magic from him. Then Hengist's eyes went wide and his face went pale. He sees through our glamour, Doug said. Right, said Gus. He took off the scarf. Here you go. Get a clear view. Doug took off his as well and passed it to Hengist. Get a look at that, too. I expect you have the skills. Military-grade magic from Grand Normandy. Hengist stared at them, fascinated. Their muzzles were no longer than human noses had been, but they had muzzles, sprouting whiskers that reached out over their broad shoulders. Their ears were large, long, pointed, and equipped with their own whiskers, as cats are. These twitched as their owners worried about approaching footsteps. Their eyes, though human and brown and blue in color, were slit-pupiled and reflected the closet light back to Hengist. At their throats and on the backs of their hands, he saw traces of the alligator hide texture that armored their bodies. Spurs grew on their knuckles. In the gloom behind them, he caught glimpses of leonine tails switching uneasily. Take a look, Doug repeated, gesturing at the scarf he had put in Hengist's hands. Hengist tore his gaze from them and contemplated the scarf and its spell for over a minute. Then he looked them over again. They wore ruddy brown jackets, blue jeans, and boots. Each carried a blue cowboy hat matching the jeans. Grand Norman military, he said. Yes, it fits. You know about Grand Normans? Asked Doug. This is all their gift. The clothes, the scarves. They rescued us. I really think we should go up to the cafeteria, Gus said, where there's room. He noticed Hengist was staring hard again, this time at his mouth, at his teeth. Hengist should like the cafeteria, he thought sourly. Small chance we'd try to eat him in public. To push the cafeteria idea, Gus put his scarf back on and looked human again. While Doug retrieved his scarf and did the same, Hengist asked, What are you? He was first puzzled, then annoyed to hear an echo. Gus had chorused with him. Everybody asks that, Gus said. We call this shape Lung Mao, he nodded to Doug. He made it up, Chinese for dragon cat. The guys who put this shape on us didn't call it anything. They just took us. And now we're back, said Doug, and we want to be human again. Back? Hengist echoed. We're from Chicago. Like I said, Gus said, it's an interesting story. Several hours later found Hengist, Doug, and Gus gathered around a table in the museum cafeteria. Hengist had his phone recording, but still scribbled busily in a notebook. So that's why we tried here, Gus concluded. Hengist put his pencil down and sighed. 5 years, he said meditatively. We knew it had been at least 3 years, said Doug, but it turned out to be 5. Given what we got mixed up in, said Gus, I guess we're lucky to have come back in the same century. Hengist nodded. And the glamours restore your original appearance, he asked, halfway, confirming. Well, our faces, said Gus, they have to match our new height and bulk. Hengist rose and put his hands to his back, stretching out kinks. And you spent 3 of those years in a hive mind with 25 other captives, a troop, as Grand Normans call it, and you became Fays when you were put in the troop, he summed up. They nodded in synchrony. He gazed at them thoughtfully. But you're out of the troop now. They nodded in synchrony again. He sighed. Well, you were right. It is an interesting story, and I assume that there are many more details if only we had time, right? A third synchronous nod. That tale was certainly worth something. I'd like to propose a deal. I know someone who may be able to help you. If I put you in touch, would you be willing to stay in touch with me so I can go on quizzing you about your... He had been about to say adventure, but changed it to experience. I'm greedy for data. Doug gave him a lopsided smile. Curdian, sundered scholar of the sundered. I get it. Will this score you points with the other Curdians? Gus asked, likewise smiling. Well, yes, but I want to know more even aside from that. They glanced at each other. Sure, deal. Hengist smiled. I will keep private whatever you want kept private and keep you anonymous as much or as little as you wish, on my honor. They stared at him. He'd been coasting along, viewing only their apparent human faces, but now their detail-swallowing cat eyes showed through. What was that? Asked Gus. What? There was a little thing when you swore, Doug said. A little zip or puff or spark. There's no good word for it. I have an oath, Geas. It lets me put myself under a binding oath when I swear that vow. If I do it freely, he added, just to be careful. But you must know about things like that. You said downstairs, didn't you run into that with the Grand Normans? They both nodded again. We did, said Gus. Captain Coudray put a vow in when she made this little speech making us all officially welcome on the ship. And their magic officer swore to the truth of what he told us, said Doug. But that was before they started giving us lessons in detecting magic. We haven't run into it since. We've run into other stuff, said Gus, like the little extra twinkle around your eyes when you look through our glamour. Yes, a very expensive treatment, but I've never regretted it. Well, now that we have our deal, do you want us to promise with all our full names again, like we did downstairs? Promising to give more detail? Hengist hesitated. No, it's an open, loose-ended thing. Let's just be candid about it. On an impulse, he thrust his hand out to shake. First Doug's, then Gus's hand engulfed his. The glamour was perfect. He only felt faint hints of scaling on the backs. He sat and began to write on a page from his notebook. Her name is Helen Greathouse. She is a professor at the University of Chicago. Well, I'll let her explain herself. Why will she want to help? Doug asked. Hengist smiled. She's a Curdian, too. She'll take the same bait I did. Here's her office and her phone. He passed them the notebook page. You head on over. I'll contact her and let her know you're coming. If the next Curdian they met had an office squirreled away in a dark corner, Doug thought, he was going to ask if there was a rule about it or something. The University of Chicago was not far. Doug had kept an eye out for his sister as they crossed the campus, but didn't spot her. They made their way to a grand gray stone building and followed the directions to a dark corridor. It was a lot classier than the museum basement, with rich, dark wood paneling and little Victorian-style brackets for the small, few, dim electric lights. Professor Helen Greathouse was engraved on a small brass plate, not written on a card. Gus knocked. "Come in." They obeyed and were nailed by the gaze of a solidly built, middle-aged woman. She had long dark hair gathered up behind her head, black eyes, and an olive-toned oval face. She held a phone to one ear as she stared at them. "They're here now?" "Yes, I see that." "Oh, yes, never fear." "Val, okay, that's nice." Without further ceremony, she hung up and put the phone down. She never stopped staring. "Hengist?" asked Doug. "Yes." More staring. "You've been on the phone with him all the time we were in transit? We didn't break any speed records." "You gave us a lot to talk about." "Argue about?" Doug hazarded. "I did not ask to have—" Her confident, even defiant stare continued, but words failed her for the moment. Doug chuckled, which won him a flicker of annoyance from her. "Didn't ask to have a golden research opportunity dumped at your door, with teeth and tails and claws and scales and all those dragon-like details?" Curiosity run out. "That's from an old cartoon." "We're current on pop culture because we lived it. Hengist must have told you we really are just two guys from Chicago, to begin with." "Mm-hmm." She was still staring. It occurred to Doug that she was holding his gaze. Why? The same question had occurred to Gus a few seconds earlier, and he had wondered if it was to keep them from looking around. So while she engaged with Doug, he looked. Like Hengist's cell, her office was lined with books and artifacts, but it was larger. There was a space for 2 cushioned chairs before her desk and a carpet on the floor. Where Hengist's artifacts had run to the Egyptian, hers were American Indian. Grass-woven baskets, a Kachina figure, a drum with faded art on the skin, photos of people in regalia, and there was the raccoon. It was a big one, at least 2 feet high. It sat at the corner of her desk, upright on its haunches, gazing at Gus as fixedly as Greathouse gazed at Doug. It put its ears back in no friendly manner, and it became very obvious that it was magical. The 2 things seemed to be part of the same threat display. Gus responded as he would to a dog. He hunkered down, extended a hand, palm down, and said softly, "Hi, it's okay, it's okay, we can be friends." "No, you can't," Greathouse declared, breaking off her conversation with Doug. "She chooses her own friends, and it takes some time before—" "Oh." The raccoon went down on all fours and waddled over to Gus. It took several seconds of approach and retreat before it finally touched nose to Gus's fingers. These had looked human on the surface, but on contact the illusion faded. The raccoon thrust its head under the hand, and Gus willingly continued into a caress. It came out from under his hand, looked Doug up and down, then stared at Greathouse, which Doug felt had the same import as a nod. Then it turned back to Gus and raised a paw. Gus returned a gentle high five with his dragonized hand. The raccoon then waddled behind Greathouse's desk, hopped up on a low set of bookshelves, and, with a very human-like gesture, threw open a set of shutters. The sun showed the campus from a story up. It then let itself out and dropped from sight. "Light at last," Doug rejoiced to himself. He doubted anyone on the campus saw a raccoon jumping out of a window. "We pass?" he asked Greathouse. "Yes," she agreed dryly. "That's one of her areas of expertise. Glad to see you aren't twitchy about animals, like some city folk." They both laughed. "We're way past twitchy," Doug told her. "Taught Elvish by dogs," said Gus. "Rescued by guys who are as much horses as guys. And look at us. We're not alienated from animals." "May I look at you?" she asked, nodding at Gus's single unglamoured hand. Oh, I thought you could see through it, said Doug, starting to pull off his scarf. Gus followed. My way of piercing glamour isn't as quick and easy as Hengist's, she said. Since you don't do any magic yet, you probably don't realize it's terribly non-standardized. They stood before her without illusions. She herself stood, looked them up and down carefully for 2 whole minutes, walked around them, returned to her desk, and gave a deep, satisfied breath like a zoologist who has finally seen a live platypus. Very interesting, she acknowledged. Can you help us? Asked Gus. Are you willing? I've never done anything like it before, she mused, but I think I can. I can think of a way. Half the battle. But, she raised an index finger, my price is that I want in on your deal with Hengist. I want to look you over, quiz you, hear about your travels. Sure, no problem. She motioned to the chairs. Sit down. Let's talk details. And we will hear about the details next time.